everyone! Thanks for tuning into my show. I've got a super fun project to share with you today, and the best part is you don't have to go out and buy new yarn because we're using all of our scrap yarn to make this beautiful pocket shawl. And so gather up all of that yarn you have, all those small pieces, leftover skeins, and maybe you already have them in a pile, and I'm going to show you this really easy pattern to do. It's not quite beginner tutorial, but if you know how to do the double crochet stitch, you can certainly do this pattern, so don't forget to hit subscribe and let's get started. The materials you need for this project include 2 crochet hooks size 6 and 4 millimeter, a yarn needle to sew in our pockets at the end, a pair of scissors, and a bunch of scrap yarn. Now you could certainly mix in any other yarns that you want. That's kind of the best part about this project, is that there's room for creativity and you can pick whatever colors you want. You can use your scrap yarn, you could use new yarn. I personally had way too much scrap yarn. Look at all this. It was getting a little out of control. I actually have a lot more than this. This is just some of it. And I really wanted to do a fun project with this yarn. I've been meaning to make a pocket shawl, and I thought, well, let's just make a really colorful one and use up some of these scraps. So I always start by just poking through what colors I have and maybe get a color scheme going. Like I have a lot of greens and pinks and blues here. So just start by picking out some colors that you want to use and come up with a color scheme. And you don't have to have bright colors like me either. Even if you have a bunch of muted tones or you want to mix like muted and bright colors, that part's up to you. And that's what makes it so fun, is that you can just use whatever you have laying around and make a beautiful shawl without spending any more money and cleaning up some of that yarn. So let's get started. Okay, so once you've picked out a few colors that you like, make sure that you like them, first of all. Don't use your scrap yarn that you don't like, because then you're not going to like your shawl. Pick out some colors that you like and that look good together. And I just start with a few. Let's start with this purple. I really like this one. Alright, and we're starting with the size 6 millimeter crochet hook. We're going to start with a slip knot. And the first shawl that I made, I used 180 chain to start. It ended up being a little long. So if you want it long, 180 is great. If you want a little bit shorter, you could do 160. So for this tutorial, let's do 160 and just start chaining. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you've done 160 chain, here we go. We're going to do our first row and double crochet only. We're just going to do maybe 2 rows of double crochet to add a little border to our shawl. So you've done 160, just do 2 more, and then we'll start with double crochet into the 1, 2, 3, 4th chain from your hook. Here we go, and go ahead and do a whole row of double crochet. If you guys are unfamiliar with double crochet, please go back and watch my tutorial on basic crochet stitches. This is not necessarily a beginner tutorial where I show you these stitches, so it's helpful if you already know what the double crochet is. And go ahead and do a whole row like that. Okay, once you've done an entire row of double crochet, go back and count your stitches to make sure you have 160. Even if you somehow ended up with 1 or 2 too many or too short, it's really not a big deal. You don't have to start over again. You should have an even number of stitches though. That's the most important part. And we will end the row. We're actually going to cut our yarn. Leave a good length tail, like maybe 6 inches, and trim your yarn. and just pull that end all the way through. Now I'm going to show you the secret to using multiple colors without having multiple ends to tie in at the end. And the secret to doing that is fringe, which is what we're making here on our ends. So that's why we're leaving a tail. If your tail to begin with was kind of short, don't worry about that either, because there's going to be so much fringe at the end of this project that it's just going to get hidden in a bunch of that anyway. So now we will turn our work and we'll pick out our next color. Let's see, which one should we use? How about this one? Leave a tail at the end. Do another slip knot. Okay, so I'm just going to do another row of double crochet for our border. The way I start a new color is to go into the top of the first stitch and yarn over, do a slip stitch. I'm going to tighten this little tail also. Okay, and then do chain 3. 1, 2, 3, that counts as our first stitch, and we'll then begin working in this second stitch. And go ahead and do another row of all double crochet stitches. This is just for our border. You could certainly do more rows of double crochet if you want a little bit thicker of a border, but I'm just going to do 2. I'll meet you at the end of this row. Once you've gotten to the end of your second row, again, leave a tail. Cut your yarn and pull the end through. Alright, now we're going to start a third color. Now, a color that you might want to use might not be quite enough for a full 160 or however so many stitches you chose. So that's okay. If you run out in the middle of a row, you can just pick up and start a new color. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But just go ahead and pick out your third color. How about... I always hold up these colors and see which one would look good or in the sequence. I kind of like the pink actually, so let's use pink next. And we're going to start the second part of this pattern, and it's a basic V-stitch. I'll show you an example here. Here's from a shawl that I already made. And you can see this V-stitch looks really good with all these different colors. It kind of looks like a zigzag. And it has a great texture. And it's a really fun pattern. It's super easy. So go ahead. Oh yeah, we made it. Oh, what happened there? Okay. So we make another slip knot. And working back in the other direction now, insert your hook through the first stitch and do a slip stitch. Tighten your tail, chain 3, and now we're going to start the V-stitch part of this pattern, and we're still going to be using double crochet stitch. And this time we're going to be working in between the posts from the previous round. So start with 2 double crochet into the second space between stitch 2 and 3 from the previous round. So go right in that space, double crochet, do another double crochet into the same space. And now we're going to skip this space and work into the next space, again with 2 double crochet. skip the next space and do 2 double crochet into the space after that. Again, skip 1, 2 into the next, and do this repeat across the whole row with the 2 double crochet into one space and then skipping the next space. This is what it's looking like so far. When you get to the end of this 3rd row, we're going to do 1 double crochet into this top chain. Remember how we did 3 chain here? So just do a double crochet into that top chain. And go ahead and cut your yarn. Pull the tail through. And go ahead and pick out your next color. I want to use this blue color next. And also, I don't think this is enough yarn for a full row, so I can show you how I change color mid-row also. And again, give yourself a couple inches at the end and make a slip knot. We're going to start our next row with a slip stitch into that first stitch. Chain 3. And now we're going to be working in between these little bunches of 2 double crochet. So yarn over and do a double crochet right in between those 2 posts. And another one. And do the same thing and do 2 more between these 2 posts. And we're not chaining in between, we're just going straight into 2 double crochet into another 2 double crochet between the 2 we did in the previous round, in the previous row. And this is what creates that V pattern, because you can see it's making a little V here, and then we're putting another V in between it, and so on, and it ends up looking really cool and kind of like a zigzaggy also, that you don't necessarily notice if you're using one color yarn. I think this specific pattern looks great when you use multiple colors and different colors for each row. It really stands out. Okay, so when you're mid-row and you run out of yarn, I always leave a good amount of length at the end, and I like to transition into a different yarn right between the two double crochet stitches. So go ahead and pick out the next yarn you want to use. I usually pick out something that's similar in color. This one's almost the same, it's a little bit darker, but that'll do. Make another slip knot. And now going back to the yarn that's still on our hook, we're gonna start the stitch by doing a yarn over, insert, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and right before you do this last part, this is where I like to pick up my new yarn and use that to pull through the last 2. And now I move these back, and you can go ahead and with that new yarn do your next 2 double crochet, and it's a pretty seamless transition. You could also use a magic knot here if you prefer that method. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to have these strings here that I'm going to tie together when I'm done. Or you could kind of like weave them in to your work as you're working, whichever method you prefer. I'm just going to go back and weave them in and then tie them off when I'm all done. And go ahead and continue with the same V-stitch pattern, the 2 in between the 2 from before, and we're just going to keep repeating that for, I think I did 28 rows for my shawl, but that part's really up to you. If you want a thicker shawl, you could certainly do upward of 30 rows. Or if you want more of a scarf, you could also definitely make this into just a scarf with no pockets or whatever. So if you want more of a scarf, you could do like 20 to 25 rows. The shawl, I do almost 30. Or if you want an extra big shawl, you could do as many rows as you want. Really, that part's up to you. I love doing projects that kind of leave room for you to be creative. That way, you know, you're not making something exactly the way I am. You're making your own version, and I feel like that's super special and great for artists and crafters to just create something that's kind of their own. Get that. So I'm at the end of that row, and we're always ending our row with a double crochet into that 3rd chain. And then we're cutting our yarn, pulling that tail through, turning our work, and repeating this row for however many rows you want. And we're always starting with a chain 3 and ending with a single crochet, so there's always like that 1 stitch on the end. And that's what it's looking so far. I'll show you the shawl I already finished so you can see more. So here's a detail of the shawl that I already have made. I'll zoom out a little bit for you. You can see I did 28 stitches. This is what 28 stitches looks like. It looks so awesome with all the colors and all the fringe. Just use whatever you have left of yarn for the fringe. And if you don't have any yarn left of one color, that's okay. Like, see this color, I didn't have any, so I just use the 2 that were on the side of it, and you can't really notice if you miss a color or not. So whatever yarn you have left over, just use that for the fringe. The way you do the fringe, honestly, I'll show you real quick. I cut about 5 pieces that are a foot long, and I fold them in half. And then just on the end here where that chain 3 or that single crochet is, I'll just insert, pull all those strands through, and then pull the tails through that loop. And I might tuck in these little single end pieces in there too. Sometimes you don't need a hook and you can just do it with your hands. And that's how you do the fringe. And now I'll show you how to do the pocket. So here's the detail of the pocket we're going to be making. I switched to a size 4mm crochet hook for this part because the size 6 kind of leaves us with some big holes, which is nice for the shawl part because it's loose and drapey, but we don't want anything falling out of our pocket. So size 4 makes it a little bit tighter. And all I did for this part, using a separate yarn, you can use your scrap yarn or not for this. I chose to do solid color because it kind of stands out nice against the multicolored this, and then you can see like the solid color here. You could certainly use multicolors though, it just might blend in a little more. And all I did was 25 stitches across, so just start with 25 chain and then do about 12 rows of double crochet. And I'll show you how to do this little crisscross action on top. So here's my 12 rows of double crochet. I did 25 stitches across. And now I'm going to do the detailing at the top part, which is, I think it's called an X stitch or crisscross stitch. I'm not really sure, but start with a chain 3. And now we're going to be using double crochet again. And we're going to start in this second stitch and do a double crochet in there. Now we're going to go back and do a double crochet into this first stitch where our chain's coming out of. Okay, and that makes like a little crisscross. And we're going to repeat that to the end of the row. So again, we're going to skip this first stitch and go into the second stitch, do a double crochet. And then we're going to go back and do this one that we skipped. Alright, and continue that all the way across. That's what it looks like so far. When you get to the end of the row, do one double crochet into the last stitch, chain one, and turn your work. And in between these crisscross rows, I just like to do a single crochet. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a row of single crochet, going back in the other direction. It looks nice just between your crisscrosses to have a little, just a little row to separate them a little bit. When you get to the end of your single crochet row, chain 3 and turn your work. Okay, so I'll show you again. If you use an odd number of stitches like me, you're going to want to start your next row of crisscross. You're going to start into the second stitch and go back and do the first. If you started with an even number of crochet, you would go to the third stitch and then go back and do the second. So either way, go ahead and do another row of that crisscross. It's kind of a fun pattern and gives it a nice little detail at the top of our pocket. And when you're finished with that second crisscross row, go ahead and do one final single crochet row at the top, and I'll meet you there. Once you finish the pocket, we're going to go ahead and sew it onto our shawl. Leave a long tail because we're going to use that to sew it on. I usually do twice, well, like measure it out to the perimeter of my pocket, and then I'll double that length. Alright, so leave yourself about that much yarn. And go ahead and pull that tail through your end loop. And now we're going to figure out where to sew on our pocket. So the best way to do that is to put on your shawl and see how far your hands come down, and then take this and just kind of line it up right where you want your hand to be on the length, because depending on what length you chose for your shawl, it's going to be a little bit different. So just put it on and kind of measure where your hands come down and then mark it. So I know I'm going to want about 6 sets of V's before I do my pocket. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's where I'm going to sew my pocket. So I line up the bottom with a row of V's to keep it straight. And I'll center it too by counting the rows on each side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So just move it over just one row. Okay, once you've centered your pocket, we're going to go ahead and sew it on. You're going to need your yarn needle for this part. If you don't have one of these, you could certainly crochet sew it on, but this really looks the best if you use one of these. So find the end of your tail. If it's frayed, just give it a little clip and stick the end through. And then I like to tie a little knot here on the end. Do a double knot just so it doesn't come out. Okay, so we're attached to our corner here. And all we're gonna do to sew it on is I'm gonna go directly back through this corner and then down through the work. Pull it all the way through. And then I come back up, pull it through again, and we're just going to use this basic sewing method to sew on our pocket. Sometimes it's easier to look at the back, and I'll like go in between those V's. And just do that along all 3 sides of your pocket and line it up with the rows so that your work is straight. Once you've gone all the way around with your pocket, I like to bring the yarn right if you go through, but not through the front, so it's kind of in the pocket like that. Then you can cut your yarn and weave it in and tie it off right there. And then you can go ahead and tie and cut off all the rest of your yarn tails and sew on another pocket, and you're all done with your pocket shawl. Hopefully that all made sense to you guys. Please let me know if you have any questions below in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date on my latest projects. Thanks for watching.